Welcome to lab number 5, studying the muscular system. We are on page 26 in the lab packet, looking at the different types of muscle tissue, and then we're going to go into the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle. So starting with our first muscle tissue type, there's 3 types of muscle tissue. There's skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. The picture we're looking at here is skeletal muscle. What's unique about this type of muscle are it's made up of long cylindrical cells. So we can see here on the slide that we have these long cells with these striations, which are vertical striped looking structures that is characteristic of skeletal muscle. We can also see multiple nuclei. The darkly stained structures are the nuclei of the individual cells. So the cells are all the way across, running parallel across this picture here, each being an individual muscle cell, and then with the multiple nuclei near the edges of the cells. So that's characteristic of skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is a voluntary muscle. It's what attaches to our bones and allow us to move. Cardiac muscle is the muscle found in the heart. If we look at the diagram here, we can see that it is a branched cell that makes up muscle tissue. So here we can see there's spaces between the cells. You can see some white in between there where there's not any cardiac muscle cells. These typically have one nucleus within the cell, and again they are branched, but they also have the striations that we saw in skeletal muscle. So when you see these vertical stripes, those are called striation, and we find that in cardiac muscle as well as skeletal muscle. But again, these cells are branched, so you're going to see some open spaces between those cells when you look at them on a tissue slide. The next muscle type is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle does not have any striations. That's probably the most characteristic feature of smooth muscle. And if you look at individual smooth muscle cells, they're pointed on the ends. So we say they are spindle-shaped. Spindle-shaped just meaning that they are narrow on the ends, narrower on the ends than they are in the middle. So we find smooth muscle lining walls of hollow organs, such as lining the stomach, the intestines, the bladder, the blood vessel, the uterus, those hollow organs, and it helps propel substances along inside of those organs. So now we're going to look at the muscles of the skeletal muscles, and you need to create flashcards of these muscles because it's going to help you learn the anatomy by having flashcards. And remember the rules for making good flashcards: no more than 2 structures per flashcard. And also for the muscles, you do have to also put the action of those muscles on the back side of your flashcard. So the first side should have just a picture, and then the back side should have the name of the muscle as well as its action. So no more than 2 structures per flashcard, and be sure you include the actions as well. So our first 4 muscles are shown on this page here. We have the occipitofrontalis muscle. That is the muscle of the forehead. Its action is to raise the eyebrows. The orbicularis oris is a round muscle that goes around the lips, and that allows us to pucker our lips, as in making or giving a kiss. So that's the orbicularis oris. Think of oris as the oral cavity, and orbicularis means going around, like planets orbit the sun. It's orbicularis oris. The masseter muscle is right in front of the ear. If you put your 2 fingers in front of your lower ear and clench your teeth, you can feel that masseter muscle bulge out. That is the muscle that elevates the mandible or brings the jaw up toward the maxilla, or just essentially when you clench your teeth or chew, you're using that masseter muscle. The sternocleidomastoid is named according to the bones that it attaches to. The sternal portion means this muscle attaches to the sternum. So here on the diagram on the right, we can see this muscle that comes across the neck here and attaches to the sternum. It also attaches to the clavicle, so that's where the sternocleido name comes from. And then mastoid refers to this large mass of bone that's part of the temporal bone. We call that the mastoid process. So that's where it attaches. So if you turn your head real hard to the left or right, you can feel this muscle stick out. For example, if you turn your head to the left very hard, you can feel this muscle stick out behind your right ear, and you can ride it down If you keep your fingers along it and feel where it attaches to the top of your sternum, right in the middle, right at the base of your neck, that's the sternocleidomastoid muscle. And that muscle, when we turn our head, it shortens. Like if I'm turning my head to the left, the sternocleidomastoid muscle on the left side is what's working to pull my head to the left. If I turn my head to the right, it's the sternocleidomastoid muscle on the right that's turning my head to the right. If I contract both muscles, it would bring my chin to my chest, or it would flex the head. So it depends if we're contracting one or both in terms of which way the head is going to move. So it's important throughout, again, this lab that you also know the actions and understand what the word flex and extend and abduct and adduct means. If we look at our joints, when we're flexing a muscle at a joint, that means we're decreasing the angle of that joint and we're bringing that body part closer to the body. So when I flex my bicep, or if I'm flexing the elbow, that's a perfect example, flexing the elbow, I'm bringing my hand closer to my body, closer to my upper arm. That's flexing. Extending means you're straightening out that joint and moving that body part away from the midline. So when I stretch out my hand, like to shake a hand, that's extending the elbow. So flex means to decrease the angle of a joint. Extend means to increase the angle of a joint. For example, if I'm flexing my knee, that means I am kicking my leg backward behind me, bending my knee back behind me. That would be flexing the knee. Extending the knee would be when you straighten your leg. That's extending, because you're increasing that angle, bringing that lower leg further from your body. So it's important that you know what flex and extend means. And then abduct and adduct. When I abduct, that has the letter B in it, I'm taking the body part and moving it away from the midline. So when I first do a jumping jack, I'm moving my arms away from my body and legs, and then when I adduct, the two D's, that's bringing them closer to the midline again. So the motion of moving a body part away from the midline is abduct. Just like when we abduct a child, you're taking that child away from the parents. And then adduct again means I'm bringing it closer to the midline. So our next muscle is the deltoid, and it's named after its triangular shape. It's triangular, it's pointed at the bottom and wider at the top, and it's on both sides of the arm at the top. And if you look at its action, it abducts the arm. So when we bring our arms out and raise them at the sides, that's abduction of the arm, and that's the deltoid muscle that controls that movement. The trapezius is a diamond-shaped muscle. If I look at it on the back side of the body here, I can see it attaches to the base of the skull, goes to the top of the shoulder, and then comes down at an angle and attaches to the spine about midway down. That's the trapezius muscle. If I look at what it does, it extends the neck or head, which means you're basically bringing your chin up as far as it'll go. That's the trapezius muscle. And also shrugging your shoulder, moving the scapula up and down. That's the trapezius muscle that allows for that motion. The next muscle, the latissimus dorsi, is shown here. This is the muscle on the sides of the back. So when you see the word latissimus dorsi, think lateral, meaning on the sides, and dorsi, referring to the back. This muscle allows us to bring our arm backward and then pulling it forward, as we would be doing if we were swimming the crawl stroke or the front stroke in the swimming pool. That's where it gets its name, the power stroke. So adduct the arm means you're bringing it back to the body, and extending it means you're taking that arm and putting it behind you and then bringing it forward, like I said, if you were swimming doing the front stroke. So on pages 22, 29, 30, and 31, you have some opportunities to label some of these muscles. I would recommend that you pause this video, take some time to label those based on the descriptions, and then you can check your answers in your textbook. At the end of chapter, I believe it is 6, you have an opportunity to look at some of these muscles, and there's nicely labeled diagrams to compare your answers. The next muscle on the front side of the body is the pectoralis major. This is the muscle that lies over the chest region. So if you look at the function of that, it adducts and flexes the arm. So when you bring your arm forward in front of you, that's adducting it. And then flexing it is also, oh gosh, I'm trying to describe this. When we bring our arm downward in a downward motion, if you have your elbows out to the side and you bring those elbows back to your body, that would be adducting. And flexing would be if you bring your elbows out in front of you and touch them in front of you, that would be an example of flexing the arm. So both of those motions involve the pectoralis major. The rectus abdominis is a muscle of the abdomen. Those fibers run straight up and down, so that's where it gets the name rectus abdominis, right in the front, along the midline, straight up and down. And that compresses the abdomen, as in when you're doing a sit-up, and that also will flex the vertebral column when you do a sit-up as well. So that's the action of the rectus abdominis. That's where we get the proverbial six-pack. You can see there's some connective tissue separation. So when these muscles are working hard and there's a little fat layer over the surface, you can see those connective tissue separations very well, and it shows up as what we call the six-pack. The external oblique, those are muscles that are found alongside the rectus abdominis at angles running from the lateral side of the body toward the midline. Again, has the same action as the rectus abdominis, but when we add a twisting motion to our sit-up, we're working a little more of the external obliques, which helps develop those muscles a little better. The biceps brachii, this is a muscle that has two heads as it inserts in its origin and as it inserts into the bone at the top of the humerus. That's where we get the bi prefix from. And then brachii is referring that it's located on the upper arm. Remember, this is the brachial region, the upper arm. So the biceps brachii would be found right here when we're in anatomical position, and that helps flex the elbow. So when someone is lifting a weight, bringing it closer to their body, that's an example of flexing the arm at the elbow. So be sure on the lab exam that you write biceps brachii, because there's another biceps muscle we're going to learn about, and it's found in the lower body. The triceps brachii is on the back side of the body. It's opposite the biceps brachii. Here we can see this is what extends our arm at the elbow. So when we straighten our arm out, we're working the triceps. This muscle is typically underdeveloped because we don't usually straighten our arm against any kind of resistance, so it freely falls down with gravity. So this muscle doesn't have to work very hard. As a result, we tend to get flabby arms on the back side of our arm because we're just not working that triceps enough. The flexors and extensors of the wrist and hand, here we can see this is the palm side of the hand and this is the top of the hand. So the flexors of the wrist are when we're bending our wrist inward towards our body. That's flexing the wrist. And those muscles are found on the underside of our arm or on the anterior surface of the arm if we're in anatomical position. So these here on the left would be the flexors of the wrist and hand. And then when I extend my wrist, that's when I bring my wrist up and back. Those muscles are found on the posterior surface of the arm when we're in anatomical position. So these would be the extensors of the wrist and hand. Moving to the lower part of the body, the gluteus maximus is one of the major muscles that makes up what we call the buttocks. So this is a very large muscle. We look at its action. It extends the leg at the hip, so when you take your leg and lift it up behind you when you're standing, you're working that gluteus maximus muscle. These next three muscles, the rectus femoris, we have a typo here. It should be rectus femoris, R-I-S, sorry. And vastus lateralis, vastus medialis. There's some typos on the page here. We'll have to correct those. So this should be I-S, and this the L and the U should be removed from here. But these are the muscles that make up what we call the quadriceps. Quad means four. So there's four muscles in the quadriceps. You only have to know three of those, and that's the three that are listed here. So if we look down at the knee, use the knee as your reference point. The muscle that runs right in the middle, straight up and down here, is the rectus femoris. Now remember, this is over the femur, so the word femoris makes sense. So it's rectus femoris, just like we had a rectus abdominis over the abdomen. Straight up and down, right in the middle, is the rectus femoris. Then on either side are the two vastus muscles. If it's on the medial side of the body, here we can see the spine, so this is the midline. This is the vastus medialis, and on the other side is the vastus lateralis. So those are the three muscles of the quadriceps you need to know, and these muscles are working when we straighten our leg. Like if you're kicking a ball, you're using your vastus lateralis, medialis, and rectus femoris muscles. The Sartorius is the longest muscle in the body. It attaches to the outside of the hip and extends down to the inside of the knee. So quite a long muscle, the longest muscle. It's also called the talar muscle because when we make the motion of crossing our leg in front of us or sitting Indian style, we're working that Sartorius muscle to bring our leg over. So that's the Sartorius. When we say it flexes the hip and knee and rotates the leg, that's what allows us to cross our legs sitting Indian style or gosh, I forgot now. Just crossing your legs when you're sitting. So that's the Sartorius. And you can see on both sides here, attaching from the outside of the hip to the inside of the knee. Very long muscle. Looking on the back side of the leg, we have the biceps femoris. Again, it's over the femur, so that's where the femoris name comes from. But for this now, we have to look at the tendons. If you reach down, feel behind your knee, you'll feel some ligaments back there. You'll feel that there's two on the inside of your knee and there's only one on the outside of your knee. If you look at the tendon on the outside of your knee and follow that up, it leads to this large muscle called the biceps femoris. So it's a large muscle on the back side, the lateral side of our knee, on the back side of the body though, up in the upper thigh. So this is the biceps femoris. Then the other two ligaments that you feel are tendons on the inside of your knee. They're tendons actually because they're attaching muscle to bone. Those are the two tendons of the semitendinosus. Excuse me, I can't talk today. The semitendinosus and the semimembranosus. The semitendinosus lies on top of the semimembranosus. So this here, what we see, this wide muscle underneath, that's the semimembranosus. So here and here, this is one muscle, the semimembranosus, and this thinner muscle that lies on the top of this wider membranosus, so this is the semitendinosus, again lies on top. So one muscle's underneath and the other one on top. So think of tendinosus on top, both starting with a T. And those are the muscles that make up what we call the hamstrings. And they're given that name because butchers used to hang this ham muscle, which is taken from the same region of a pig, and they were hung in the butcher shop by these tendons extending from these muscles. So that's where the word hamstrings comes from. But you have to know their actual names, which are the biceps femoris, the semitendinosus on top, and the semimembranosus on the bottom. And then we get to the lower leg. On the front side of the lower leg, attached to the front side of the tibia, is the tibialis anterior. And that makes sense because it's anterior. It's on the front side of the tibia. And the action of this muscle is to dorsiflex the foot. So to dorsiflex means to bring the toes back toward the nose. So if you were walking on your heels and bringing your toes upward, that would be working the tibialis anterior. The gastrocnemius is known as the calf muscle, and it has a long tendon, which we call the Achilles tendon here in the ankle region. That helps to plantar flex the foot. To plantar flex means to point your toes. So if you're walking on your toes as like a ballerina would, that's plantar flexion, and that's going to cause a action from the gastrocnemius to accomplish that motion. So pay particular attention for the lab exam on the terms flex and extend, what the difference between those are, and adduct, abduct, as well as dorsiflex and plantar flex. On the lab exam, it'll be a multiple choice question, so we won't expect you to call it up out of memory, but you should be able to recognize the action if it's listed in a multiple choice format. One of the tricky ones is with the hip, flexing and extending the hip. Again, when we're flexing, well, let's look at the biceps femoris, for example, semitendinosus, semimembranosus. That's extending the leg at the hip. That means you have a straight leg and you're moving that leg backward behind you. That's extending the leg at the hip. And flexing the knee means I'm bending my leg at the knee and bringing my heel backward. that's what we would say is flexing the knee. So be sure that you pay particular attention and even make the motions with your own body to get those muscle actions to stick. So I encourage you to browse through the Dropbox photos that we put out on Blackboard for you to practice with the different muscle models and really quiz yourself. I also put an assignment out on mastering A&P on the website for you to practice with some lab homework, and be sure to use that to study for the lab exam as well. There is a lab exam coming up on the muscles, so be sure to take the time using your flashcards to really prepare, knowing where these muscles are as well as knowing their actions. Thank you, and we'll talk again soon.